I overheard two old ladies last night that were sitting at a table near us eating their dinner, and they said, "I've got my lotto ticket in, it's a big one. What would you buy if you won the lotto?" And the other woman immediately, without even any hesitation, said, "Probably a bunker." And then the other one responded, "Yeah, it's like that, isn't it? That's a good idea." I thought, how interesting. If two old ladies, random cross section, who purchased lottery tickets are concerned about the state of the world right now, then it's probably an indicator that there's a lot of fear out there, and there are some very good reasons to be fearful at the moment. So if you're a contrarian, you'd probably say that's the indicator that it's not going to happen, and I hope that is the case. But for everyone else, who is concerned about the prospects of World War III, and I do believe that we are smack bang in the middle of a fourth turning. You can check out this video here if you want to know what a fourth turning is. But essentially this time of great tumultuous crisis and chaos, and traditionally global conflict on a massive scale has occurred throughout fourth turning. So, there's a lot of conflict in the world at the moment, and World War III is certainly a possibility. It seems like an increasingly likely possibility, which is a horrific prospect, particularly given the amount of countries that have nuclear capabilities today. So a lot of people are making videos about where to go to sit out World War III. I've got my own thoughts on that. So this is the global conflict tracker. You can't see this, I'm going to pop it up on the screen for you. And there's a bunch of different maps out there that you can find by just Googling world conflict currently, and they will show you what's going on in the world in regards to armed conflict. So as I scroll around the globe there, you can see and get an interesting lay of the land of what's happening in the world currently. And if we click on something like conflict in Libya, let's scroll this up. Okay, so we've got it by region. In the Americas, you can see instability in Haiti, Venezuela crisis. Asia, we've got instability in Afghanistan, territorial disputes in South China Sea. Quite a few territorial disputes around China, and instability in Pakistan, conflict between India and Pakistan, confrontation over Taiwan, that seems to be looming in everyone's mind. Civil war in Myanmar, that has been ongoing for a very long time and extremely bloody. War in Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, that's between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And we have conflict in Syria, instability in Iraq, conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon, so it's worsening, conflict between Turkey and armed Kurdish groups, Israel-Palestine, Palestinian conflict, civil conflict in Libya, conflict in Yemen and Red Sea, civil war in Sudan, violent extremism in the Sahel, confrontation with Iran. There's a lot of stuff happening here, and we've got sub-Saharan Africa, we've got the Central African Republic conflict, Democratic Republic of Congo, we've got instability in South Sudan, there's a civil war going on in Sudan, all right, Somalia, Ethiopia, a lot of stuff. Interestingly, in the Asian one, they're not talking about the conflict, which is fairly recent. I'm just going to move the map over to this part with Bhutan, between China and India. There's a very interesting confrontation happening there. That's not new. It has happened back in 2017. There was a standoff that I believe took about 2 months with the Indian army and the Chinese army kind of facing off before there were negotiations, and they both stood down. But essentially, China is claiming territory that is part of Bhutan. Bhutan doesn't really have much of a military presence. They're usually much more of a just leave us alone. This is an extremely strategic area for India because it's got that choke point that you can see right there between Bangladesh and Nepal, a very narrow point of Indian land that leads to the state that is above Myanmar and bordering with China and Bhutan. And so right now that conflict is occurring, and there is an increasing tension between them. Some massive countries that are having a lot of tension right now. So any one of these things could erupt into an all-out global conflict, particularly given what I've seen from at least the US leaders. They seem to be keen on escalation of military conflict globally, unfortunately. And it would be wonderful if that wasn't the case, but that does seem to be the case. So what I find interesting here is that the Southern Hemisphere is looking pretty good. The Southern Hemisphere is looking very white and clean there in regards to no conflict. I mean, look at Latin America there, it's looking pretty good. Now, even the southern region of Africa, also minimal conflict there in the Australia Pacific Oceania region as well. However, there are issues with, because what most people will say is, where do you go to avoid World War III? Well, you go to Australia, you go to New Zealand, you go to Latin America, you go to these more further away places, you go to Iceland. But a lot of these countries have allegiances and political classes that will inevitably become involved, entwined with the global conflict. And if you're in Australia, you're not going to avoid it. We will be shipped off just the same as everyone else. So it does make sense to look for somewhere where they're more keen to stand back and say, hold on, this is not our fight. And it does look like Latin America, for that reason, is probably a better place. But there's some other things to keep in mind, and that is that yes, you can move to these countries. Latin America has wonderful residency options that are accessible for almost everyone. They are remote enough where it's unlikely that there'd be any direct conflict in that region. There might be some small inter-regional conflicts, but those hopefully you can avoid. But the key is that you want to go somewhere where you are going to be able to integrate into society, because during times of conflict, that's when people really start to band together or turn on each other, as we saw here in Australia. If you call the pandemic a time of conflict, a lot of people treated it like a war, and they were willing to just call up and dob in their neighbour because they saw them out walking an extra kilometre than what they were supposed to be doing, or they had visitors when they shouldn't, and all this sort of thing. So if you're in a place like that, that's probably not going to be a good place to be during a global conflict. You want to be in a place where people band together, where they have a good sense of unity, and where you can slot into that unity, where you can either speak the language or you can pick up the language fast, or you have the ability to purchase land, purchase something that gives you some self-sustainability, so that you can feed yourself, so that you've got running water or a water source somewhere, and that is remote and away from a lot of the potential disruptions that occur during some massive conflict. Cities are probably the worst place to be, because cities are reliant on the resources coming from somewhere else. And the moment those supply lines get cut, then you end up in a hell of a crisis, because you've got millions of people who don't know how to survive. They are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous people. So you want to be somewhere where there's less people rather than more people. Now, you can go too far on the isolated spectrum. I mean, you could look at places like, Vanuatu. They have a citizenship program there. Amazing place. Absolutely love Vanuatu. However, they get hit by hurricanes quite frequently. Their supply chains are reliant on air or by sea. They're infrequent. And when you look at what happened during the pandemic, is that the expenses went up massively as a result of the supply chain being disrupted. And you can guarantee that during global conflict, supply chains will be disrupted massively. Now, next door to Vanuatu is Solomon Islands. They are talking about bringing out a citizenship by investment, so they may be a possibility as well. But the same issue there. Maybe somewhere like Fiji, a larger, more powerful Pacific nation, might be a better bet for that. There's Palau as well, which has a very open and liberal residency program that you can set up there. I mean, these are all kind of paradise places. There's Mauritius if you head over to the Indian Ocean, and again, that's got a great residency program by investment and pathway to citizenship, but you are at the mercy of the supply chain. So that may not be for you. So I would lean towards places like Argentina, where they have great food self-sufficiency and energy self-sufficiency. Quite a few of the Latin American countries do, because they produce a surplus of food. And that is a place that, in my mind, is a good place to be. At least for me personally, culturally, I feel like I could fit in to the Argentinian. It's very European culture there. I already speak Spanish, so that's not going to be an issue so much, and we could potentially build a community. Now, if you aren't able to fit in culturally within the countries that you're looking to sit out the war from, then the next best thing would be to get a community of people around you today in the country that you're in, that you already know. And ideally, if you can get as remote as possible, that would be good. If you can get as self-sufficient as possible, that would also be beneficial. That's going to help you rather than being stuck in a city and not knowing your next door neighbor. But the very first step that you could do is just get to know the people around you and start to attract like-minded people and start to build a community. Now, developing skills is another thing that no one can ever take away from you. So learning languages, super important in this day and age. Yeah, we've got translation abilities and all that, but what happens if tech isn't working? What happens if you can't charge your phone to translate or the internet is down? Well, how about you learn a language? Pick the one that you think is going to be most useful for you. I think if you can speak Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, these are languages that could really come in handy. If you can learn skills like trades, things that are practical, useful, learn how to grow food, learn how to produce things, fix things yourself. Become a handy person. I know it's crazy because we really let those things go, but now it's coming back. I think the skill of making money is probably the biggest priority right now. If you can make location independent money, that is going to be so helpful. And I think understanding how to store and also move finances around in a time of crisis will be really handy. Look to the countries that have had a lot of experience in this, the countries that have experienced hyperinflation like Turkey, Argentina, and look to see what are the pathways, or Russia as well, how they get around the sanctions by getting money in and out of the country, and understand how that works, because it may just come to a point where you need to move your assets and move them as fast as possible. And cryptocurrency would be a key thing to understand much better if you don't understand it already, and kind of wet your beak, getting to know it a bit more. I think all these things are super important, as well as looking at the countries that you could potentially move to and checking out if they have residency options. Look, Russia, I think, is a fantastic place in regards to them opening up their residency. The biggest downside to Russia is that for any global conflict that is like a World War III scale, they will be at the center stage of that. And yes, it's a gigantic country, so you could probably find somewhere in Siberia to sit most of that out. But there will be a lot of aspects that will involve Russia. And so that is a negative in regards to considering the countries where you could plan for a darker future than we're experiencing right now. Hopefully, that is not necessary, but I think it makes sense to be prepared for a worst case scenario while hoping for the best case scenario and being an optimist, but a realist at the same time, because the time to be preparing for these sort of things is right now. Actually, probably yesterday, many years ago, would have been even better, but today is way better than when the crisis actually happens, because that's when it's going to be the hardest to gain access to countries, because generally countries will limit the amount of access that they have to foreigners. And that's why you want established residencies, you want established ties to the country, so you have a very good reason to get into that country. Citizenship would be the best because they can't deny you that access. I mean, Australia was an example of a country that went against that during the pandemic and did totally deny access even to citizens to get back into the country or leave the country. So there's going to be exceptions to that, and we are in certainly crazy times. Let me know what I missed, what tips you have below. Create a great resource for people who are aware of the crisis that is occurring around us right now and are looking to be proactive and do something about it, so that they are no longer a victim of circumstance and they are taking control of what is within their control and letting the rest just, run its course like history will. Alright guys, that's all for today. Keep in mind that I believe there are no perfect places out there, but I do believe that there could be somewhere that is perfect for you. Let's find it together.